Okay, Bezat Hashem, today in Masechet Shabbat, we're going to start at Ibai Lehu, Lamed Zayin Amud Aleph, first line on the page, Ibai Lehu. We're going to have three sections in today's learning. We'll do a refresh in a minute. So the first section we're going to learn today is a shaila about samuch. We've been learning there's a problem to put on the kira, inside the kira, for shihiyah, for example, or chazara. What about next to the oven? So see, this is an interesting shaila.
Still some heat.
There's some heat, but it's not usual way to cook. We'll get to it. That's number one. Then we're going to introduce a new discussion, really, which is the idea of mitztamek v'yafelo, mitztamek v'ralo, which is if it's fully cooked, but it's not good for it, it is good for it. This is going to introduce a new discussion, which will also be nogea to the machloket Chananya v'Chachamim, Zat Hashem. And in the final section we'll discuss is what's the psak by shihiyah, and the psak also about mitztamek v'yafelo, mitztamek v'ralo. That's going to be the end, Bezat Hashem, the bottom of Lamed Zayin. We're going to try to push to finish to tomorrow, the Lamed Zayin bed at the bottom, Bezat Hashem.
Yeah.
Okay, but just a quick refresher of where we're holding here, because in order to appreciate this, we have to have a quick reminder of the shitot, really, that we're coming out with here.
Yeah.
So we have is like this. We have a big machloket Chananya v'Chachamim. This is the big machloket we've been discussing, how it fits in the Mishnah, two ways to learn, fine. So let's just remember. We have like this. We have a gezerah, the Chachamim said, in order to either put food on before Shabbat and leave it on the kira on Shabbat, or to return it on Shabbat, chazara, shi'ar chazara, concept of gerufa or ketuma. So it means either scraping out the coals, cooling down the coals, by putting the ashes on it before Shabbat. Now, the machloket we had Chananya v'Chachamim was that according to Chananya, you don't need gerufa or ketuma for shihiyah. Shihiyah is okay. For chazara, you need shihiyah. And according to the Chachamim, you need gerufa ketuma also for shihiyah. Okay? Now, it's very important what I'm about to say, which now we're going to understand this, and I think this will explain a lot. Hashem, you go through the sugya, slowly get little pieces along the way and things become more clear. The Chachamim say, even for shihiyah, you need gerufa ketuma, right? They say, right? So, that's only if it's not fully cooked.
Yes. Now we open the
See,
door.
This is where things get a little complicated. Yes. If the food is fully cooked,
there's no problem for
why do you need gerufa ketuma?
It's fully cooked.
Ma pshat in gerufa ketuma? If it's fully cooked, why wouldn't you be allowed to put that on the oven before Shabbat? Meaning, you're not going to stir it because there's no maila in having it cook more. It's already cooked.
What about to keep it hot enough?
It'll stay, meaning it'll stay. We're not so worried about that. We're worried about assisting in the cooking process.
No problem.
Now we're going to have a chiluk though. What if it's fully cooked, but it's mitztamek v'yafelo?
Maybe you're interested.
Then maybe there is a problem. That's going to be the second section we'll discuss. But
really,
I
don't know if it is something that really...
We're going to get there. We're not going to talk about that first. The first thing we're going to talk about is samuch. This is a very interesting shayla like this. We said if it's on the fire or in the fire, so then Shem yechateh b'gechalim, shalom shalom, and if you're going to stir it, that could be an isur of havara on Shabbat. I understand. But the first question we're going to discuss here is, what if you don't put the food on the kira or in the kira, you just put it samuch l'kira, next to the kira.
Okay.
So now you have two reasons that that's better. It's not as bad, because first of all, the heat is less. Secondly, this is an unusual way of cooking. You don't usually cook by putting it next to the fire. Usually it's either on the oven or in the oven. So there's two reasons over here that one could argue and say, for this, you don't even need gerufa ketuma. Means even if there wasn't gerufa ketuma, shihiyah or chazara would be mutar next to the fire. Now, Tosfot explains, this is a shaila both in Chachamim and in Chananya. Why? Let's speak it out. According to Chachamim, you need gerufa ketuma for both chazara and shihiyah, right? So it's a shaila in them is, can you put it before Shabbat next to the fire and leave it that way on into Shabbat, or could you return it? Or could you return it to the fire without gerufa ketuma, but putting it next to the oven? Because again,
you return it to where?
Chazara next to the oven on Shabbat.
Chazara
again, meaning both options in the Chachamim would be I understand gerufa ketuma would be needed for shehiyah or chazara if you're putting it on the oven or in the oven. But what about next to the oven? You'd say again, the heat's not so strong, it's unusual, so it's less of a chashash, shem yichateh b'gechalim. So maybe that wouldn't require gerufa ketuma. It would be mutar to put it samuch to the oven without gerufa ketuma. Without gerufa ketuma.
Shabbat or before Shabbat?
That's what I'm saying. It would be a shaila in both cases. Chachamim say you need exactly according to.
It's also another question.
Now one second. In Chananya, it's also a shaila. Why is it a shaila in Chananya? Because Chananya, as we're going to speak more about in the next section, he only holds you need gerufa ketuma for chazara, but he only says that you're allowed to use for shehiyah without gerufa ketuma if it's machal ben drusai.
They're new things that you add right now.
So it's not something new because we did mention this earlier in the Masechta, and I have mentioned this a few times. We didn't speak about it so much in this sugya. It's true.
So
Chananya holds machal ben drusai sheyaz mutar, but if it's not machal, exactly, if it's not machal ben drusai, so now the question, you do need gerufa ketuma. So the question now is, if it's not machal ben drusai, could you do shehiyah, but shehiyah next to the oven, not on the oven? So Tosfot, one second. So Tosfot, therefore, and with chazara bechlal, you need gerufa ketuma.
But what do you mean?
So what I'm just pointing out here is this the way Tosfot explains? This is a question in all the shitot, Chachamim and Chananya. Whatever case would be asur that you need gerufa ketuma. What about samuch? That's the question. Okay. Is there an issue of not having gerufa ketuma if you're putting it either shehiyah before Shabbat near the oven or chazara near the oven on Shabbat? Would that also be a problem? That's the question we're asking over here. And again, the logic in this is samuch, it's not as hot, so it's less of an issue. You're going to stir the coals, and also it's an unusual way. It's lo davar ragil, and memele, it's less likely you're going to get involved in stirring the coals next to the oven. So here's the oven, and then instead of putting it on the top of the oven or in the oven, whether it's shehiyah or chazara, either way, you're putting it next to the oven, sitting on the floor, on the floor next to the oven. So there is a little bit of heat that comes out. The question is, do you also need gerufa ketuma that will be asur, or do we say no? That's already not a normal thing. You don't.
But a question. One condition is the pat. It's to dosai ma'achal shel.
I just explained. It would depend on the shita. So it's talui if you hold the Chachamim or Chananya, that would be the shaila. But either way you learn, just Tosfot explains it goes within all the shitot. Question is samuch, in the case that would be asur for al gabav, going to be mutar or asur without gerufa ketuma? So let's read that inside. Ibailu, the first white line, Lamed Zayin Amud Aleph. Ibailu, they ask the following question. Ma'u lismoch ba, are you allowed to put the pot of food near the fire? Next to the fire. So you have the oven, and you want to put the pot next to the oven, on the floor. I understand to put it inside the oven or on top of the oven. Again, either chazara, shehiyah, you don't have gerufa ketuma, so I understand that would be asur. But maybe you'd say if it's on the floor near the oven, shapir dami, it would be acceptable, because there it's less hot. Less likely you're going to stir the coals.
Saying that.
This is the Gemara saying option number one. Or dilma, or perhaps lo shna, there's no difference. It's a shaila question. Is it mutar or is there no difference? And it's also asur without gerufa ketuma. That's the question. So Tashma, let's bring a proof. Now this is a proof from the Tosefta we brought yesterday.
What was
the Tosefta? So the Tosefta said like this. Let's read it inside. Shtei kirot hamatimot. If you have two ovens that are two double stoves, right, that are next to each other. Achat gerufa ketuma. So one of them you did the proper hachana, you did scooping out the coals or cooling them down. V'achat she'ena gerufa ketuma, and one of them is not gerufa ketuma. Mash'in al gabi gerufa ketuma. Now we learned this in the Shita Chachamim, but you could do shehiyah on the oven that has had gerufa ketuma done to it. Remember the case. You have two double stoves. One second. You have two double stoves next to each other. There's a wall in between them. So he said, okay, the one you did gerufa ketuma, they're both hot. Let's say they're both on Shabbat. You're allowed to do shehiyah on the one that's gerufa ketuma, not on the other one. Says the Gemara, but wait a second. Putting it on the oven that had gerufa ketuma is samuch to the one that did not have gerufa ketuma. And there's heat coming from the one that did not have gufa ketuma. So says the Gemara, you see, samuch is only mutar. You see from here that it is samuch, it is still samuch, and you see what's the halacha? It's mutar.
Meaning the shia gerufa, lo gerufa, lo ketum.
That's the point.
There's two sides.
Hold your thought. Let's see inside the Gemara says again. Tashma shtei kirot amatimot achat gufa ketuma, achat sheina gufa ketuma. Mash'in al gabi gufa ketuma. Says the Gemara, what do you see? Va'af al gav de kasalig le havla meidach. Even though the heat is coming from the other oven that was not gufa ketuma. So what do you see? Samuch is mutar without gufa ketuma. Don't know. Of course it is.
The samuch.
Samuch,
there is one status here. There's no samuch and shia.
Rega. What do you mean?
You mashe on it. There is a separation between them, right? נכון?
מה זה סמוך?
שתי קירות.
מה זה סמוך?
נר.
Okay. So what does samuch have to do with shehiyah?
אז אתה אומר.
Shehiyah is the mlacha.
But shehiyah is not the one that is gerufa ketum.
Correct.
So what's the problem?
That's for sure mutar. That's not a problem.
No.
The point is, the oven that's next door, that's right there, what's going on there? It was not gufa ketuma. It was not gerufa ketum, right? And there's heat coming from that oven.
It's not even shehiyah.
I mean, there's not shehiyah. I understand what you're saying.
It's not even
shehiyah means you put a pot on the oven before Shabbat.
אני מבין.
No.
But there is no shehiyah on this specific oven.
You're not putting it on that oven.
Right.
But
ניר.
Chazak.
No.
So what do you see? Samuch. It's a shehiyah before Shabbat, and it's going to go into Shabbat, and the heat is coming from the other oven that you didn't do gufa ketuma. So you see, we don't worry, that's okay, that's mutar. It's mutar to put a pot next to an oven for shehiyah, even though you didn't do gufa ketuma.
And what you said, they could do
it's not direct.
Although,
it's not direct heat.
That's the raya. It's good. So you see, because it's not so hot, or because you're not going to do shami yechateh, however you learn, it's mutar. Beautiful.
But what you
so
said
samuch.
Is you're getting some heat from the oven next door, right?
Exactly, that's it. So that's the raya. You see, the only issue of shehiyah without gufa ketuma is al gabav or betocha. But if it's going to be samuch, even without gufa ketuma is mutar. It's a good raya.
שמים על המחם בשבת, על המחם למעלה, ביצים קשות.
למה זה שונה?
אתה שומע את השאלה מה שהוא אומר?
That's the proof.
הגמרא רצה להביא את הברייתא הזאת החיצונית, שהנה הוכחה שמותר לי להניח לפני שבת סיר צמוד לאובן שהוא דאבל סטאק אובן, אחד עם לא גרוב ולא כתום ואחד גרוב וכתום. אני שם את זה ליד זה, למרות שאני מקבל קצת חום זה שלא גרוב וכתום, גרוב פתוח, אש. מותר להשוות. השאלה אם זה באמת, למה? יכול להיות שזה...
מה החילוק?
כי פה יש שתי אובנים, אחד, ופה שאתה שם ליד זה, זה אובן אחד וזה... יכול להיות שזה...
תגיד החילוק, מה החילוק?
למה אנחנו מסתבכים אבל?
תגיד החילוק, מה החילוק?
נכון? We went according to Chananya.
השאלה? פסק הלכה?
כן.
אל תדבר על פסק הלכה.
רגע,
זה בסוף הסוגיה. אבל זה
בסוף
בסוף הסוגיה, לא רוצה לדבר על זה. השאלה כאן זה בין בחכמים, בין בחנניה.
חוזר בי.
אוקיי, אבל זה הראיה. There's a big difference we're going to point out in a minute, but the raya is, as you see from here, even though it's near the oven that didn't have gufa ketuma, and the heat is coming a little bit from it, we're not worried about that. So samuch to an oven that didn't have gufa ketuma is mutar.
אין פה מחזיקים בשל.
אבל אולי זה שונה, כי פה יכול להתבלבל בשני האובנים. ופה יש אובן אחד רק.
So the Gemara's answer, it says not a raya. Why is it not a proof? It says like this. The question we were asking was, if you put the pot on the ground near the oven, the heat that comes from it is more. Here, you put it above the other oven. Where is it? It's on the stovetop of the oven that had gufa ketuma. Next to it is another oven. As the heat comes up the air, it blows it away. It dissipates that heat.
I understand how it looks like exactly. Explain me.
You have two ovens next to each other. Two ovens, you probably have in your kitchen in Pitaloka. Two ovens next to each other. There's a wall between them. Yeah. Some of the heat is going to come from the second oven, and there's a pot on top of the first oven. It's on top of it. Now, the one it's on top of is b'chal mutar, because there was gufa ketuma, shehiyah is mutar. No problem. But the proof we're trying to bring is the heat coming from the other oven that did not have gufa ketuma. It's mutar. We're saying it's not a problem. Ai l'chaura, it's samuch. So you see, samuch, you don't need gufa ketuma.
So
the answer we're saying is not a proof. Why is it not a proof? Because the whole question we were asking was, can you put it next to the oven that didn't have gerufa ketuma on the ground, the heat comes out is more.
How is it some is more?
If you put it here on top of the stovetop, the heat that's going to come out mixes with the air already, and when it comes out, it cools it down.
The first example is sitting on the floor.
That was the question. You're putting it on the floor next to an oven that didn't have
There's more heat that's coming?
Like,
בוא נעשה ככה רבי, רגע, זה 1, זה שני, נכון?
This is kira 1, this is kira 2.
נו, איפה יש פה בכלל בעיה?
The question we're really asking is, if אני שים pot here, and this oven didn't have gerufa ketuma, maybe the heat that's coming out of this is a ba'aya. That's the question really. But the raya we're bringing is, you're allowed to put a pot on top of stove number 1, and we're not worried that the heat from stove number 2 will heat it up. The answer to the Gemara says you can't prove this to this, because here, as the heat travels up, the air cools it down, it blows it away.
But also, what about
in this case, which is the case of the question, it's right next to the other oven that didn't have gerufa ketuma. So therefore, this isn't a proof to what we're asking.
Okay.
And that's not an answer.
This is not
here. Exactly.
It's here.
Exactly. That's the point. Right? That's why it's not a proof. Let's read that inside. Okay. That's what the question still stands.
Makes sense.
Yeah. Let's see that inside. Says the Gemara. So he said, even though the heat's coming from the other oven, seems to be, it's not a problem. So answers the Gemara, no, dilma sha'ani atam, it's different over there. In that bright down, that tosefta, it's different. The kiven the medallia, because since you brought it up, you elevated, you put the pot on top of the oven with gerufa ketuma, shalit ba'avira, ha'avir sholet ba, meaning it cools down the heat that's coming from this oven. So that would be mutar, but to put it next to an oven with gerufa ketuma, that's not necessarily mutar. Meile, that's not a proof. Tashma, let's bring another proof. The Amar Rav Safra, Amar Rav Chia. Rav Safra said in the name of Rav Chia the following psak. Now, pay attention with this. This psak that we're going to bring a proof from, he says 4 things that are mutar. What does it say like this? He says like this. Kitma, if a person did ketuma, he cooled down the coals. He covered the coals in efer before Shabbat, and he cooled it down. But vinit lavta, what happened was, the heat broke through, and it reignited. Vinit lavta means, he cooled it down, but then after he cooled it down, what happened? The heat came back.
Wind or whatever.
The wind, maybe it brought it up, but it reheated. Okay. So his kavanah was to cover it to show that he's not going to do cooking, which is one of the ways to avoid the issue of shemi yechateh. But then it reignited, it heated again.
But he already been from his end. He mevatel.
Beautiful, beautiful. This itself is going to be a discussion in the next section. We'll see. Is that enough or not? Now, Rav Safra goes with the shita. It is enough. You did what you wanted to show. You're not going to cook with it. That's sufficient, even though it reheated. So says Rav Safra, 4 things that are mutar. Somchin la, maze somchin la. You could put the pot next to the oven. Okay. O mekaymin aleha, or on top of the oven.
Somchin la ze badofen.
Somchin la next to it. Next to it. Or on top of the oven. Vinotlin mimena, on Shabbat you could take the pot off of the oven, umachzirin la, and you could return it to the oven on Shabbat. Now, we're looking at Rav Safra Amar Rav Chia, and he seems to be saying 4 chidushim. You could put it next to the oven on top of the oven. You could take it off of the oven, which is taking it off, or return it to the oven on Shabbat. Now, what do you see from Rav Safra? Says the Gemara, you see, when are you allowed to somchin la? When are you allowed to put it next to the oven?
When is gerufa ketum?
When you first did ketuma. Now it reheated, but the point is, Rav Safra's shita, which Matan pointed out, is you did what you needed to do. The fact that it reheated after, that doesn't make it, but you did ketuma, which is mashma. Let's say you didn't do ketuma. What about somchin la?
Then shema yechateh.
You didn't do ketuma.
Im lo asita ketuma.
Then you cook it.
Are you allowed to do samuch la on Shabbat?
No, because there is.
No, you're not allowed to. The point here is, as long as you did ketuma, even though it reheated after, you did ketuma what you needed to do, you could be somchin la. So, if we look at it as 4 chidushim,
go back and we have to do ketuma.
If we look at it as 4 chidushim, the fact that Safra is saying somchin la, it's mashma that if you didn't do ketuma,
you can't be somech.
So you see, without gerufa ketuma, even samuch la is asur. It's very clear,
But
very
this
good
is
proof.
according to Rav Safra.
There's a proof.
But there is two sides.
Let's see, let's read the proof. Shma mina. So you see also from this, lismoch nami, that even to just put it next to the oven, again, ketuma, only if you did ketuma in, that would be enough. Lo ketuma, if you didn't do ketuma, lo, it wouldn't be enough. So you see that just like it's a problem, al gaba or betocha, if you didn't do gerufa or ketuma, sheyah or chazara would be a problem. Samuch la would also be a problem. Everybody hears the proof?
סמוך לגדרה זה both option, the bottom and the top?
No, samuch next to it.
Samuch.
Next to it. Understand? Everybody good? Everybody good with the proof?
Wait.
So samuch it's not good if you don't make too
Rav
much.
Safra, again, let's read it inside. Rav Safra says, let's speak it out. Rav Safra says that if on Erev Shabbat, okay, you did ketuma, you put ashes to cool it down. Somehow it relighted. But you didn't light it, meaning it relighted. Okay, so he says that's enough. Because you did ketuma. You did ketuma. It relit. That's too bad. Whatever. That's fine. And then he says, so what are you allowed to do now? You're allowed to put the pot next to it. You're allowed to put the pot on it. You're allowed to take food off of it on Shabbat. And return.
You basically consider like a katum.
Which means, what's he saying?
Lo katum ze baya.
Okay, so he's saying is the reason you're allowed to do samuchla is because you did ketuma, but if you don't do ketuma, you're not have samuchla. So you see included in the gzeira, included in the gzeira, samuch would be the same as al gaba. That gerufa ketuma is necessary even for samuch. That's the proof. That's the proof. Za chidush.
So we said, okay. So we're talking about the one that you mash'eh on.
Mm-hmm.
The one that you mash'eh on, doing the sheyah on,
okay.
You have to do gerufa katum.
Exactly.
But the one that you
We're
are...
going, let's say like the Chachamim, let's go in their shita. But really it goes both ways, but yeah.
The sheyah,
the sheyah requires gerufa ketuma. The question is, what about sheyah samuch? That was the shayla. That's the whole shayla we're talking about. Let's see, right? So the proof is, you see, samuch is only mutar because you did ketuma.
On your kira that you do the sheyah.
Exactly, but if you didn't do...
So how we tied it to the beginning of
So if you didn't do ketuma
Can you write 1 and 2 1 second on the kirot so I can get it straight? Okay, please.
No, this is not the case we're talking about now. Now we're not talking about this anymore.
It's one oven.
Forget about it. We're talking about one oven. One oven.
So how we tied it to beginning of the question?
So now we're going back to the beginning of the Mishnah. Sheyah.
We had a question. Hello. What's going on? We had a question. Question was, is samuch the same as al gaba? We know al gaba to do sheyah according to the Chachamim, chazara according to Chananya, you need gerufa ketuma. Is samuch the same? Does samuch also need gerufa ketuma?
But it's not. Is it the same direction?
One second. That was the question. Okay. The proof we're saying is Rav Safra Mavchia says, if you did ketuma and then it reheated, but you did ketuma. He holds, by the way, that's enough. We'll see. There are shittot to argue. Let's say that you forget it. If it's fasta, meaning you lost it, it's not. But he holds that's enough. Okay. So then you can put it samuchla, al gaba, lachzir, litol. But mashma, the only reason samuchla is mutar is because you did ketuma. But if you didn't do ketuma bichlal, samuch is also asur.
Okay.
So you see samuch and al gaba is the same.
Okay, so this is a proof that what we asked
afilu samuchla requires gerufa ketuma. It's a very clear proof.
For one kira.
Forget about 2 kira. That was only the proof from a tosefta. But now just 1 kira. That was the question: is samuchla asur without gerufa? The answer is yes. Very good. So what the Gemara answers is not a proof, and I'll tell you why it's not a proof. When it says samuchla, that step, it's lav dafka. That's not the chidush. That's not the chidush in Rav Chia's words. Really, samuchla would be mutar even without gerufa ketuma. So why it says samuchla? The chidush really is al gaba. Samuchla was just brought agav. Sometimes we have that they brought it in agav, but that's not really the point that Rav Safra is trying to bring out. How could you say such a thing? So says the Gemara. Let's see that inside. Gemara brings a proof that it's lav dafka. Let's see. Says the Gemara, but the way that you're trying to bring a proof, notlin mimena de katani, you have to also fit that proof into the word notlin mimena. There are 4 things that he said: samuch, al gaba, notlin, v'machzirin. 4 things that he said. So he said, but wait a second. The way you're learning, you should also have to say, only if you had ketuma, you could take it off the fire on Shabbat. But that doesn't make any sense. notlin mimena. There's no issur to take something off of a fire on Shabbat. So the way you're learning, it makes notlin mimena not make sense. Notlin mimena de katani, when it says notlin mimena, kitma in, lo kitma lo, does it mean only if you did ketuma you could take it off the fire? That's not true. That's pashut not true. There's no shita that holds to take it off of a fire. What is sur melacha or even gzera d'rabanan is included in notlin mimena. So obviously it must be, it's a little bit lav dafka. It's not meduyak in the words of Rav Safra. Elas, therefore says the Gemara, it's not a proof because Tana notlin mishum machzirin. The reason we taught notlin is really the chidush is you could return it to the fire. So too says the Gemara, Achanami Tana somchin mishum mekaymin. We taught you could put it next to the fire, but that's not the chidush. The chidush is put it on the fire. That's a chidush, but really samuch maybe it's mutar. The only reason without gerufa ketuma, the only reason we taught samuch is etzem the chidush is mekaymin.
זה כמו זוגות כאלה.
Exactly.
להניח למעלה ולזה.
Meaning when he said these words, he was really trying to say two chidushim. What are the chidushim? Machzirin and al gaba. Included in that. The chidush is you could put it on the fire before Shabbat, which is shehiyah essentially, because you did ketuma to some degree. It's not considered as if you lost it even though it reheated, and you could return it to the fire on Shabbat. Why did he say samuch and notlin? Of dafka, but that's not a proof. Really, that would exactly agav. The Gemara calls it agav, derech agav. But really, that's not. Those things don't require ketuma. Those bichlal would be mutar. Yeah, exactly. That's the proof.
So you can actually do a chazara also.
So therefore,
לא, מה מעניין אותי? כתומה, גרופה, אם אני רק לוקח, מה זה משנה? גם לא כתום, גם לא גרוף, לקחת אין בעיה. אז מפה אני לומד שזה כאילו דרך לשון שהוא מדבר. מותר
אבל איך אתה עושה חזרה? How you can do chazara?
Because you, again, his shita is, as long as you did ketuma, it's
but
like
if
ketuma.
You know that it's real light.
That's the point. His chidush is, we're going to see, no, we'll see in a minute, there's a machloket about this, but Rav Safra Amar Achia holds, if you did your ishtadlut, you did the ketuma, it relit after, it's not your cheshbon.
But chazara, you already know.
But that's the haguf. You showed you're not going to get involved in cooking. That's what you did. So that's the Gemara. One second. How could you compare? You're saying the fact that notlin mimena is lav dafka, somchin la is also lav dafka. Says the Gemara, I don't agree with that so easily. Achi ashta, says the Gemara, wait a second. Achi ashta means, here now, but it means, it's not a fair comparison. Zelo domeh zelazeh. Hata notlinu machzirin bechad makomhu. I understand saying notlin mimena, you said that to say machzirin, because that's the same place where you're taking it from and putting it back to. Zeoto makom. I understand why one could be agav the other. Meaning you said notlin, agav machzirin. Tana notlin mishum machzirin. I understand that. Elahacha, but in the beginning of the Braita of Rav Safra, somchin bechad makomu. Somchin is next to the oven. Umekaymin bechad makomu, and mekaymin is on top of the oven. So therefore, you can't say that it taught somchin agav the chidush of mekaymin if it's two different locations. So maybe really it is a proof, and it is a proof that in order to put by itself, it's a chidush, which is to put samuch to the oven. There does have to be a gerufa ketuma. But ultimately what comes out with the second raya is we don't know when it says samuch, is it dafka or lav dafka? So memela, this can't be accepted as a clear proof. It could be that it's a chidush by itself, and you do need gerufa ketuma even just to put it next to the oven. Or it could be that it is just agav mekaymin aleha, and therefore it's not a proof at all. Therefore the Gemara doesn't accept this proof. So finally the Gemara says, okay, my have Allah. My have Allah is usually at the end of a sugya, it'll say, what's the outcome? What's the psak? Tachlis, what's the psak? Are you allowed to put samuch to the oven, sheyah, chazara, if you didn't have gerufa ketuma? What's the psak? So says the Gemara, Tashma, let's bring a proof. This is more clear. It says, Kirash. It's a third proof, yeah. Usually tashma, yeah. Usually it's a bright tashma. So tashma kirashe sikua the gefet uveitzim. Remember, this is we spoke about in the Mishnah. Gefet is the psolet of the shumshimin. It's mosif aval, exactly. These require gerufa ketuma, right? Or eitzim. So these are things that require gerufa ketuma. So if you had it heated up with these items and you did not do gerufa ketuma, Says the Braita, somchin la, you could put the pot next to the oven, and there wasn't gerufa ketuma. Ve'ein mekaymin, but you can't leave it on top of the oven. Ela imken gerufa ketuma, unless you did gerufa ketuma. So this is a clear proof. Braita says clear. You didn't do gerufa ketuma. You could put it next to the oven, but not on the oven because there's no gerufa ketuma. So that's a proof. That's a clear proof. The Braita says you could put it next to it. Let's just finish. Let's finish the Braita. Gechalim she'amemu. Ein mekaymin means you can't put it on top. Unless you did gerufa ketuma. Unless you did gerufa ketuma, exactly. So on top of it, sheyah would be problematic, or chazara would be problematic depending on the shita, unless you had gerufa ketuma. But samuch la, mutar even without gerufa ketuma. Okay, so that's the answer.
That's the only chidush here then for the.
Let's finish the Braita. That's a big chidush. It's a big chidush. Let's see. Finish the Braita. Gechalim she'amemu. If you have coals that cool down, or shenatan alea naoret shel pishtan daka. So it's interesting. If the coals cool down, so if they cool down, the Braita holds that's like it's dometek tuma. That's enough already. The coals cool down before Shabbat. Or shenatan aleh naoret shel pishtan. Naoret shel pishtan, it's the shaft. It's like the psolet of the pishtan. Okay. So it's like tuma because it's like covering the heat. So either way, daka harei ketuma. That's enough to be like a ketuma. So bottom line, you see from the Braita that next to the oven would not require gerufa ketuma. Now again, whether that's shehiyah or chazara, however you go, whatever would be asur al gaba betocha, that's only al gaba or betocha if you didn't do gerufa ketuma. But samuch la be mutar even without gerufa ketuma. Okay. Says Tosfot, you cannot prove from here that it's mutar to put something next to ish, next to a fire. That's not agreed. Why?
Next to the fire.
He says, let's say on Shabbat, you wanted to take a pot of food, or before Shabbat, shiyah or chazara, either way, next to an actual fire. Next to a fire. You have a fire going, you want to put it next to the fire. So mikan, you could say, you see, samuchla doesn't need gerufa ketuma.
Fire is not כמו גחלים.
Says Tosfot, sha'ani achad dofane kira mafsikin beino v'la'esh. Meaning to say is, in the case that we're discussing, there's somewhat of a separation. The heat is not as strong. We're not as worried you're going to stir the coals. Fine, because it's irregular, it's not normal. Okay. But next to a live fire, that would be not necessarily mutar.
Where does it say?
That's Tosfot, just the last Tosfot on the page. Okay, Chevra, let's move on here. Baruch Hashem. This is next. So yeah, now we're going to get into a discussion. But before we see this, now we have to go over Chananya, the Chachamim. Levanta? No? Yeah? What? I got it. Bottom line, we had a question, right? We had a question which was, samuch la, does it require gerufa ketuma?
No.
And the proof we brought in the end is, you don't. Why not? Again, because the heat isn't strong. It's not so strong. And we're not worried, shemi yichateh. That's the bottom line. Bottom line. Period. Now, this is very important. When we come to Chananya v'Chachamim, this is very, very important. We'll get to the sugya we're about to do. This is something we didn't discuss so much before. We learned about this before.
But probably the condition of the meal, of the pot.
According to the Chachamim, you need gerufa ketuma for both shiyah and chazara. According to Chananya, you need only for chazara, shiyah you don't need.
Right.
Now this is very important. According to the Chachamim, you need gerufa ketuma for shehiyah.
Gerufa ketuma?
For shehiyah.
Ken.
That's only if the food is not fully cooked. Only if the food is not fully cooked. If the no, that's more. If the food is fully cooked, more than drusai, then drusai is a third or half.
Yeah.
If the food is fully cooked, completely cooked, why is that logical, by the way? תחשוב על זה. מה כל החשש כאן? שמי יחטא בגחלים. If it's fully cooked, you're not going to stir the coals. So therefore, so 1 second, hold on, we're getting there, hold on. So the point is, what do you see? What's the Chachamim hold? That if the food is fully cooked, you don't even need gerufa ketuma for shiyah, it wouldn't be necessary. Chananya holds, in order to do shehiyah without gerufa ketuma, shehiyah, you don't need gerufa ketuma, it does not have to be fully cooked. What does it need? Ma'achal ben dusai. Which is a leniency. You understand? But let's say it's not ma'achal ben dusai. So maybe you would need gerufa ketuma. I'm just pointing out. Chananya's mekil is lenient and he says shehiyah is mutar without gerufa ketuma, but It has to be
Yeah.
k'ma'achal ben drusai.
It's a completely rare, no good.
Exactly. Chachamim hold.
Maybe more machmir.
They hold if it's ben drusai, it needs gufa ketuma. But if it's completely cooked, you don't need k'ma'achal ben drusai.
מבושל כל צורכו בן דרוסאי.
Exactly. Evanta? Good. So now, like
So
this.
wait. In what status then if it's not cooked? And it's above ben drosai?
Yeah.
מבושל?
So,
Medium?
Chananya holds, then we don't have any gzera shami echateh. Chachamim say there still is a gzera, you need gufa ketuma.
According to Chananya, once it's past the ben dorsai,
Exactly. Exactly.
Chachamim is not enough. Have to be fully cooked.
Exactly.
And then
Fully cooked?
Fully cooked. Fully cooked. Now this
Didn't we
brings us to a very interesting shayla. Listen to this shayla. Very interesting. What's the whole logic? Because it's fully cooked, you're not going to stir the coals. There's no problem.
Yeah.
But there's some foods that even though they're fully cooked, the more it simmers and stews on the fire, it gets better.
mitztamek ve'efelo.
Which in the lashon of the Gemara is mitztamek. Mitztamek means
Shrink.
it shrinks because the water
Like
evaporates.
stew and stuff like that.
The water
Cholen,
evaporates.
cholen.
Even though the water's evaporating,
Cholen.
means it's completely cooked. The water's evaporating. The more it evaporates and it becomes more congealed, it actually becomes better.
Roast.
Cholent is an example.
Okay.
Roast, even though it's fully cooked. Now, mitztamek veralo is the opposite. Is that the more it's going to cook, it's going to get burnt and bad. So now logically, everyone will agree. If it's mitztamek veralo
אין בעיה בכלל.
and it's completely cooked, you don't
So
need
like
gufa
that,
ketuma.
but
Why
mega.
would you need gufa ketuma? 1 second. Why would you need gufa ketuma? Shemi ichateh would be to cook it faster. You don't want this to cook more. So there's no question. If it's mitztamek veralo, Chachamim would say you don't need gufa ketuma. The question is, what would the Chachamim hold about mitztamek v'yafelo? Because mitztamek v'yafelo, it's fully cooked, so we're not so worried about stirring it. But since it still gets better while it continues to stew, perhaps that should require gufa ketuma as well. Everyone understands? We're going to see different shitot now within this she'ela.
But it depends also by the type of the food, right?
That's what we just said.
Maybe not.
Exactly,
If it's
that's talui.
baked, if it's
Exactly, it's talui, exactly.
If it's
100%. That's exactly the she'ela. Some foods that are mitztamek v'yafelo, you'd say, even though the Chachamim say you don't need gufa ketuma, but maybe you shouldn't when it's yafelo, because even though it's fully cooked, it benefits
like
by
I
cooking
always
more.
say
So
for
shemi echateh.
baking, like something is baked. There is no bishul achar afia. There is no such a concept
So
of.
let's see, good. Let's see that inside Achev. We have to move a little bit because we're going to fall behind here. Says the Gemara. Amar of Yitzchak bar Nachmani, Amar Rabbi Shaya. We're going to have Rabbi Shaya and then 3 different memrot of Rabbi Yochanan. So we'll see how far we can go today. So Rabbi Yoshaya is the first one. He says like this. Ketuma. Okay, if he did ketuma, okay, he cooled down the coals. He put ashes over the coals. V'hu v'ara. Now again, this is the same idea, which is it heated up again by itself. So he did ketuma. He showed he's not going to cook with this, not going to stir it, but then it heated up by itself again. Mashin aleh chamin she'uchamu kol tzarkan. You're allowed to leave as shehiyah food. Chamin is actually water that was completely heated up. V'tavshil shebishel kol tzarko, as well as food, which is not water, other foods that were cooked in their entirety. Now, let me point out there's actually 2 chidushim in what we just said. What's the 2 chidushim?
אחד שמותר להניח על זה מאכל.
Bechlal, because it reheated. So first of all, your attempt, your hishtadlut to do ketuma, it's still considered like an effective ketuma.
Yeah,
right?
but this is really ketuma.
This is
Yeah, although it's become again
uvara means it reheated.
Yeah, but it's still considered
But maybe
ketuma.
the ashaya is also before Shabbat, no?
The השעה is before
Okay.
Shabbat. שיהיה בefore Shabbat.
קטמה ועוברה. עוברה עם שבת?
כן. הוא להניח התבשיל לפני שבת, וגם מים לפני שבת.
סליחה, 1 second.
השעין עליך משהו כמו כל צורכה. תבשיל שבישל כל צורכו. So what's the difference? Why are you telling me? חמין אין תבשיל. אתה מבין? אם אתה אומר תבשיל, חמין זה על אחת כמה וכמה שכן. כי מים...
חמין זה מים, נכון.
אין, יופי, אין אבל למים אין פרוסס נוסף שהוא קורא לו.
אין לי בנפיץ גם לחמין את המים עוד פעם. אני לא מרוויח מזה שמה מתבשלים עוד פעם.
אז למה הוא אומר חכמים ותבשיל?
כי אולי תבשיל שמצטמק וטוב לו. תבין איזה שחיים
אני אומר התבשיל, אז התבשיל הוא כבר דרגה אחת מעל המים.
התבשיל יש יותר שאלה.
Okay. הבנתי. Oh, like this, very interesting. The shita we had before held, אם אתה עשית השתדלות, כן? You did the ketuma, and then it reheated by itself. What's the halacha? That's considered ketuma. You know, that's it. It's not. Here he's saying no. First thing he's saying is that that's not considered a good ketuma. So we look at this oven as if there wasn't ketuma. That's arguing. It's cholek on the previous shita. That's chidush number one. How do I know that? Rabbi Shaya, how do I know that? Because what are you allowed to do shihiyah? Only something that's fully cooked. Only something fully cooked. Right?
But he didn't say it
according to the Chachamim. One second. According to the Chachamim, like I just said, if it's fully cooked, you don't need gerufa or ketuma. So why is he saying, the only thing you can use here is something that was fully cooked? But wait a second, according to the Chachamim, if it's fully cooked, you don't need gerufa or ketuma. Right? So what is the mashma'ut? What's the implication from this? So he's saying like this, actually two chidushim. Number one, that the tuma that you did, you lose it. You've sadita, said, you forfeited the tuma that you did.
Yeah.
Number two, chidush that you see from here is that the ketuma that they lack, it's like there was no gerufa or ketuma. So what are you allowed to put on the fire? Something that was fully cooked. Or hot water, or a food that was fully cooked. So the diuk the Gemara is going to say is, what do you see? He must be going in the words of the Chachamim, because according to Chananya, you're even allowed to put on the fire without gerufa or ketuma for shihiyah purposes, even if it's only ma'achal ben drasai. Here we're saying kol tzarko, which is like the Chachamim. Okay. But what you also see is, water by definition is mitztamek veralo. Water. Well, how do I know that? Because the more it cooks after it's hot, you lose it. So by definition, it's mitztamek veralo. So why does he need to say another chidush? V'tavshil shebishel kol tzarko. What is that adding to our havana of his shita?
Mitztamek v'tov mitztamek veralo.
Exactly. It must be saying another chidush, which is, even if it's a cholent and it's a food that gets better as it stews, but it's fully cooked, nonetheless, it's mutar to put mitztamek v'yafelo exactly on the fire. That's what we're going to prove from his words, because that's why he says two statements, which is water and other foods. Exactly. Exactly. By definition, bichlal, that's considered mitztamek.
According to Rav Oshaya, is machmir here? Yes.
So
because Rav Safa doesn't clarify it.
So like this, that's not considered a ketuma. It's not a ketuma.
According to Rav Safa?
According to Rav Oshaya.
Okay.
Why is it not considered ketuma? You tried. Very good. Sometimes in life you try, you're not successful, but it's not successful. So that's not ketuma. It's cholek on Rav Safra Mabchiyah before. So it's like you don't have gerufa or ketuma. So then what are you allowed to put on the fire?
Both.
Things that are completely cooked. But the words that he's saying is, one is things that are completely cooked, viralo. Two, things that are completely cooked, v'yafelo. So the Gemara is going to be medayik from his words. So that's why it's not as much of a chidush, but he says both to imply even v'yafelo it's mutar to put on the fire. Even v'yafelo, that's the chidush. That's the chidush. He holds like the Chachamim that fully cooked you're allowed to put on a fire even without gerufa or ketuma. Afilu im ze yafelo. So you see, we're not choshesh shem yichateh b'gechalim. Lamed zayin amud bet says the Gemara. Shma mina. So the fact that he says this extra thing about the tavshil. Mitztamek v'yafelo, that he holds, the Chachamim would hold, even if it's beneficial, as long as it stews, mutar be mutar, even though you don't have gerufa or ketuma. Everybody sees the proof clear?
Yeah.
So it would come out that he holds, the Chachamim would hold, when we say if it's completely cooked, you don't need gerufa or ketuma, that's even, we're not worried, shemi yichateh, if it would be a food that could improve with stewing more. Says the Gemara, that's not a proof. Not a proof. Sha'ani hacha, it's different over here, the kitma. It's true, his ketuma wasn't effective to be a proper ketuma, but he did something.
No.
Maybe it's only mutar of mitztamek v'yafelo in this case. You're allowed to do shehiyah with that, because the fachot, he did something, he tried to do a ketuma. So maybe where he starts off doing a ketuma, even though it breaks through after, there mitztamek v'yafelo is mutar. But in a case where he bechlal doesn't do a ketuma, maybe mitztamek v'yafelo would be asur. That's the pircha. The Gemara says you can't bring a proof from here in general. Because in general, where he bichlal doesn't do a ketuma, maybe the Chachamim would hold mitztamek v'yafelo would be asur. Why is it mutar over here? Because at least he tried to do something. What did he accomplish? He showed that I'm not going to cook with this on Shabbat. It relit after, okay, that we could disregard. But the point is, since he did some sort of an action to show that he's not going to cook with this on Shabbat, so therefore that action alone is sufficient to say that mitztamek v'yafelo would be mutar.
Why the Gemara doesn't take this as a...
Gemara says, all you see from here is that if he does an action of ketuma, that the halacha is going to be such a case,
you can't compare
even
it
though it reheats after,
to begin with.
Exactly, because at least he showed he's trying and he doesn't want to cook with this on Shabbat. But in a regular case where he doesn't do ketuma at all, maybe mitztamek v'yafelo would be asur. Exactly.
So it's not a proof.
Exactly. Ihachi asks the Gemara, Maila Memra, so then what's the chidush? What's the chidush of Rav Oshaya? So the Gemara answers, Huv'ara tzterichle. The chidush is that it relit. Maudetema, you might say, Kiven uvara hadrele lemilta kamaita. You might say, since it relit, it's like there's no ketuma in the first place. It goes back to its original state. And then bichlal it should be asur. Kamash malan, that's the chidush. At least it's mutar to some degree. That's what we're saying is mitztamek v'yafelo would be allowed in this case. So says the Gemara, all you see from Rav Oshaya, who's paskening like the Chachamim, that is, if you do some sort of a ketuma, even though it's undone after, since you did some sort of an action, he demonstrated, he showed that he doesn't want to cook with this on Shabbat, he wanted to do takanat chazal, there mitztamek v'yafelo would be mutar.
But standard,
if there's no, if you didn't do ketuma bichlal, that would not necessarily be mutar to do mitztamek.
But it's got to be according to Chachamim, kol tzorcho, or according to Chananya, but according to Rav Oshaya,
correct.
So he's going according to Chachamim.
He's fine with Chachamim, exactly.
So there is, let's say you cannot just like do a standard like something that is not cooked. It's got to be like a minimal standard in order for you to just even be qualified for that.
Correct. Correct. Now we're gonna have 3 memers of Rabbi Yochanan. We'll see if we can get through 3 of them. I don't know. We'll see. But let's see. These 3 memers of Rabbi Yochanan, we're gonna see. There's going to be 2 points we're focusing in on. Is he paskening like Chachamim or Chananya? And then within the Chachamim also, is he paskening Rabbi Yochanan?
Oh.
And also, is he paskening mitztamek v'yafelo as mutar or asur? So Amar Rabba Bar Bachana, Amar Rabbi Yochanan. Rabba Bachana, Amar Rabbi Yochanan. He's the first one. A. Rabba Bar Bachana, the name of Rabbi Yochanan. He says like this. Kitma v'huvara. If the person did kitma, he put the coals on it to cool it down, and then it relit. Okay, you are allowed to leave on it water that was fully heated or food that was fully cooked. Gechalim sharotam is coals of a certain plant of rotam. We're going to see later, it keeps the heat much longer. They're like very, what's the word? Insulated. That's what it is. They keep the heat much longer. You are allowed to put shehiyah on that if it was fully cooked. So the Gemara says, Shema mina, mitztamek v'yafelo mutar. You see, is that mitztamek v'yafelo is mutar. Now again, why? Because he's paskening like the Chachamim, is that even though it broke through and you lost the ketuma, nonetheless, you're allowed to put something that's fully cooked on the fire for shehiyah. And even though, he says a second statement, even though it's not just water, which is mitztamek v'galo, but even food that was cooked, that's mitztamek v'yafelo. So therefore you see a proof from that. So the Gemara says again, Sha'ani acha de kitma. No, maybe it's only mutar in this case, according to Rabbi Bar Bachana, Rabbi Yochanan, that it's mitztamek v'yafelo, because at least you did the ketuma. But in a case where you didn't do ketuma at all, maybe mitztamek v'yafelo would be asur. Again, iachi ma'ila memra. So the Gemara says, but then what's the chidush? Exactly. So then what's the chidush? So the Gemara answers again, uvara it's terichale. The chidush is, even though it broke through after, we still give you a leniency. So the Gemara says, hanuach. But then he's saying the exact same thing as Rabbi Oshaya. So what's Rabbi Yochanan being mosif then? So the Gemara answers, gechalim sharotam it's terichale. The chidush is, even though you're dealing with coals that are so hot that they maintain the heat, so you might say this ketuma is completely worthless. Because you're dealing with coals that are so hot, maybe you can't even do ketuma. Kamash malan, if you tried to do a ketuma, it's enough, mitztamek v'yafelo would be mutar. But if you didn't do ketuma at all, that wouldn't be mutar.
Your intention make a big difference.
So far, let's just speak out. We had Rav Oshaya, Right, Rabbi Yochanan, the first one, Rabbi Bar Chana, Rabbi Yochanan, both of them are saying like the Chachamim, mitztamek v'yafelo, we're not saying would necessarily be mutar, it would only be mutar because at least you did somewhat of a ketuma.
Not
so basically,
Exactly.
I have to do the action of the ketuma even though that it might be different levels of insulation?
Exactly. And it's enough, that's the chidush. Even though it's something that's very hot, ketuma could still work for that. That's the chidush.
Okay.
Chidush.
But there is no inyan of atmana? No. It's going to be mosif hevel or something?
That's why you're doing ketuma. You're avoiding that issue.
Okay.
Amar Rav Sheshet, Amar Rav Yochanan. Now Rav Sheshet is the second memra quoting Rav Yochanan. Okay, now this is going to be different, so pay attention. Rav Sheshet, Amar Rav Yochanan says like this: Kira sheyisikua begefet uveitzim. If he heated up an oven with gefet or eitzim, which are mosif hevel, and he did not do gufa ketuma. Okay, he didn't have gufa ketuma. Mashein aleh chamin shelo chamu kol tzarkan. You're allowed to do shehiyah with food that wasn't fully heated. So it wasn't fully heated. Water, wasn't fully heated. V'tavshil shelo bishel kol tzarko, or food that wasn't fully cooked, but it was ma'achal ben drusai.
Okay.
So which shita is he following? Chananya. That's this. Rav Sheshet Amar Rav Yochanan is saying that Rav Yochanan paskin like Chananya. Akar, once he took it off of the oven, lo yachzir ad sheyigof ad sheyiten efer. Now that's a problem already, because if there wasn't gufa ketuma, Chananya says you're not allowed to return that to the oven.
To goref in the middle of Shabbat.
You're not. That's the point. Meaning you would not be allowed to return it. Since you didn't do gufa ketuma, you wouldn't be allowed to. So says the Gemara, what Rav Sheshet Amar Rabbi Yochanan must hold? Kasavar matnitin la'achzir tenan. He holds that the pshat in our Mishnah it's talking about chazara, which is like the shita of Chananya. But to leave it on the fire before Shabbat, you can do, even without gufa ketuma, again, as long as it was kima'achal ben drusai. That's very important to note. So far we have here like this. We have two memras of Rabbi Yochanan. The first memra of Rabbi Yochanan is Rabbi Bar Chana. We'll just call it A, which is the first memra of Rabbi Yochanan says like the Chachamim. The second memra B, Rabbi Yochanan,
like
says like Chananya, and therefore, as long as it's ben drusai,
the
beseder, exactly.
What's the difference then?
Well, the amor that's quoting Rabbi Yochanan holds one. He holds like Chachamim, one he holds like.
But if he quote Rabbi Yochanan, you have to follow one shita.
That's the point. There's two different students of his quoted him differently.
So maybe it was in regards to different cases.
No, that's
because
like,
we spoke about gechalim shel rotem.
Trei Chananya liba de Rabbi Yochanan. You could say like two students according to Rabbi Yochanan. That's what it was.
Trei kalei mi shama.
Trei amoraic liba de Rabbi Yochanan. Amar Rava, says Rava. I want to finish it off with this at least because this is a very interesting conclusion here. Amar Rava tarvayu tanani. He says to Rav Sheshet, I don't understand what you're saying. You're saying that the psak is like Rabbi Yochanan. That's what you're saying. Meaning the point you're making is Rabbi Yochanan held like Chananya. That's what you're saying. Rabbi Yochanan held like Chananya. Says the Gemara, says Rava, I don't need the chidushim you're saying because both Lagabe Shehiyah as well as Lagabe Chazara, I'll show you from the Mishnayot. It's Pashut we paskin like Chananya, and therefore I don't need you to tell me that Rabbi Yochanan says we paskin like Chananya because it's obvious. Where do we learn this? So it's two Mishnayot that we learned. Tarvayu Tanani. Tarvayu Tanani means both of those chidushim, Lagabe Shehiyah and Chazara, we follow Chananya. It's a Mefurish Mishnah. Why? Lishho Tanina, we had a Mishnah earlier, Yotet Amud Bet, and in the Mishnah there we said Erev Shabbat, you're allowed to put bread in the oven, but it has to be that the bread baked to a certain degree. What does it say? You're not allowed to put bread inside of the oven. Im chashecha, near dark, Friday night. Or a cake on the coals. Unless the face of it, we had two shitot, the back or the front. But either way, what's the point? Is that kol tzarkov yekumu paneh?
Ben
dosai. And we said Chananya is the time of that Mishnah, by the way, if you remember, on Chaf Amud Aleph. Hakamu paneh. Shari. So you see for shehiyah.
Shari lachzir.
Shari shehiyah.
So you see.
No, hold on. Shari. So you see for shehiyah, it's a mefurish Mishnah. It's a psak in a Mishnah. That it just needs to be ben dosai. That's it. That's not. And Rashi says that was without gufa ketuma, or you could say Inami, you did with gufa ketuma, but gufa ketuma doesn't help you with an oven. He says we're not going to get into it right now. But the point is, you see from there that you could leave it on the oven. Sheyaz mutar from a meforsha mishnah. Yatet Amud bet. As long as it is ben dosai. So Rav Sheshet says, "Lagabi the chidush of Shia Chananya is in Meforsha Mishnah." I don't need Rabbi Yochanan to tell me that. And lachzir nami tanina lagabi chazara. It's our Mishnah lamed vav amud bet. We had it before. Beit Hillel omrim af machzirin. The third part of our Mishnah. Beit Hillel said you could return food to the oven. Ve'ad kan lo kashavu Beit Hillel el begufa ketuma. And we explained the Mishnah is talking about where there was gufa ketuma. L'kuliyam, we learned the Mishnah that way. The way that Chananya or the Chachamim learned, that it's only mutar to return it with gufa ketuma. Aval b'sheina gufa ketuma lo. But if you didn't have gufa ketuma, you wouldn't be allowed to return it. So you see, the second chidush that you're saying in Chananya is that to return it to the oven you need gufa ketuma. It's also not a chidush. It's also not a chidush. So says Rav to Rav Sheshet, what would be the chidush of Rabbi Yochanan then to say we paskin like Chananya if from Yatet Amud bet we paskin sheyaz mutar as long as it's machal ben dosai, and from lamed vav amud bet we learn with gufa ketuma you can do chazara. So what's the chidush?
I didn't understand that. I have the first one is like Rabbi Chananya.
The point is the end of our Mishnah. Beit Hillel says if there was gufa ketuma you could return something to the fire. You could return it to the fire. Yachol asot chazara. So what's the point? Then there's no chidush. Rav Sheshet Amar Yochanan is saying two chidushim. He's saying sheyaz mutar if it's machal ben dosai without gufa ketuma, and in order to do chazara you need gufa ketuma. So he's saying, but that's I don't need Rabbi Yochanan to teach me that. Sheyaz mutar as long as it's machal ben dosai without gufa ketuma.
No.
And Rabbi Yochanan is saying if there is gufa ketuma you could do chazara. So asks Rav, it's Mishnayot. You don't need Rabbi Yochanan to tell me that we paskin that way. It's Meforish Mishnayot.
But we spoke about ketuma. What happened in case it's preheat?
I don't know what you just said.
Ketuma,
yeah, but that's not what we're talking about here. That's not what the Mishnayot are talking about.
We just spoke about this two Rabbi Bar Chana and Rav Sheshet that they quoting Rabbi Yochanan. So
yeah,
maybe
we're not going with that shita. Now we're going with Rav Sheshet Amar Rabbi Yochanan. Rav Sheshet Amar Rabbi Yochanan said two chidushim. One, to do shehiyah, it just has to be cooked to machal ben dosai, even though there's no gufa ketuma. Two, to do chazara, there needs to be gufa ketuma. Says Rava to Rav Sheshet, both of those chidushim are clearly written in the Mishnayot. So what are you telling me that Rabbi Yochanan is being mosif? Because in the Mishnayot Amud bet we said if the face of the bread is not caked, it's not baked over, which is ben dosai, you can't put it in the oven. Mashma if it is ben dosai, sheyaz mutar. That's the kasha number one. Question number two, Beit Hillel in our Mishnah, in Lamed Vav Amud bet said, in order to do chazara, there has to be gufa ketuma. So that's also not a chidush. Let's just finish, I'll explain after. Rav Sheshet Nami, Rav Sheshet also, tiyuka dematnitin kamash malan. So the Gemara says enachinami. The way you're reading the Mishnayot is true. I'll say Rashi and I'll say Tosfot after. Rashi learns like this. The Mishnah could be interpreted differently. Means in the Mishnah Yatet Mabet, it doesn't say the diuk. All it says is lo karmu paneh it's asur. But it doesn't say the other way that karmu paneh it's mutar. So it's not saying clearly the shita of Chananya. So therefore we need the diuk of Rav Sheshet, which is to say the diuk is from that as long as you have ben dosai, that's Rav Yochanan, Rav Sheshet, then it's mutar. So that's actually the chidush of Rav Sheshet. So Tosfot says I don't need Rav Yochanan to point that out because that's obvious. That's the pashut diuk. So he says a little bit more. He says we need the Mishnah Yatet Amud bet to imply the way we read the Mishnah on Lamed Vav Amud bet, and this is where actually Tosfot says we paskin, and Rashi learns that too here, like Chananya. Means now that we have a Mishnah on Yatet Amud bet that teaches us like Chananya, so therefore when it comes to the Mishnah on Lamed Vav Amud bet, which could be interpreted either like Chananya or like Chachamim, that's the chidush that Rav Sheshet Amar Rabbi Yochanan is teaching us, which is what? That this Mishnah is interpreted like Chananya. And now we could explain what Tosfot was saying before. That's why we want to fit the Mishnah like Chananya, even though it's not the best easy read in the Mishnah. Why? Because the Mishnah back on Yatet Amud bet was mashma that way. And Rashi and Tosfot both paskin like Chananya Tachlis. We'll stop here. Zat Hashem will pick up tomorrow with the third memra of Rabbi Yochanan. No, Chaver, I think I lost everybody today a little bit, huh?
No, it was very intense.
There's many.
Can I do a quick review outside for a minute?
Yeah.